Rob becomes interested in martial arts when he's watching it on television, and he starts to mimic those moves at like 13 and 14, but he first gets exposed to wrestling about 15 years old. He gets together with all of his friends, and they watch and wrestle with each other. But before that, he actually attended WrestleMania 3, and a friend of his dad worked in Pontiac, and that's where the show was held, of course. So they got like tickets on row 24, and he was a big Jake the Snake fan, and he brought signs, and I mean, he was a super fan. And then sort of famously, and I think a lot of people remember this, they did the Ted DiBiase $1 Million Man skit. What can you tell us about Rob Van Dam and that skit?
You know, Rob told me when I first met him, one of the first times that I met him, he goes, you know, I was one of those people that came out of the audience and did one of Ted DiBiase's "Will you do this for money" deal. I was like, really? And he actually did the Kiss My Feet thing with Ted DiBiase and got paid at a show in Michigan one time. We went back and actually found the footage, and it was Rob Sikowski that was there. So I thought that was pretty damn cool. He was a mega fan.
It is cool, and I think that's like 87. Do you think the first time you see him in a WWF ring is 1997 against Jeff Hardy on Raw? But really, it was 87 for this $1 Million Man skit, which is kind of fun. He sort of came up in the business in a different era, almost a different time, and he worked a lot of his first matches with Greg Valentine. And those are two names that I don't think you would think about sort of coming in together. I think a lot of people have heard the story, though, of how Rob sort of got in the business and was trained. What do you remember about Rob getting into the business, or the stories that you've heard?
You know, the main stories that I heard about Rob was obviously that he had trained with the original Sheik, Ed Farhat, out of Detroit, Michigan. And the Sheik was the first one that really took an interest in Rob and really taught him how to work in the business. And when I say taught him how to work, the Sheik didn't teach anybody how to work at first. The Sheik taught you to respect the business, and he showed you holds and taught you real wrestling, and made you respect the business first, long before he ever smartened you up that the business was a work. Made sure that you were tough enough physically and mentally to be in the business in the first place.
And before he decides to actually get into wrestling, he does some tough man contests and finishes second. And he thinks he can do this because he'd been training to kickbox. But then one day, ironically, he has a chance meeting and gets an opportunity to start training with the Sheik in 1989. And that chance meeting happens when he's in a grocery store bagging groceries for a living. And prior to that, he had sort of flirted with the idea of Killer Kowalski, but he wound up with the Sheik. How do you think Rob's career might have been differently had he went to Kowalski's school instead of the Sheik?
Well, he'd probably be running the WWE right now if he had gone to Kowalski's school.
I was hoping you would say that. So it is a different era. Have you heard of, some of the training methods that the Sheik would do? I mean, I think most people listening to this are familiar with the Sheik, and if you're not, we're not talking about the Iron Sheik, who you actually have a pretty good impression of, right?
Huck for to be. Maybe I'll bend your back, fuck you in ass, and humble you, Connie, a baby.
Oh, God. I love you just did the JR deal at the end, too. So he starts...
You were always my favorite.
He does like 12 matches in 1990, but he says that, realistically, none of the stuff that we know Rob Van Dam for was taught to him by the Sheik. The Sheik taught him how to tie up, how to put on a headlock, the really basic stuff. But Rob knew early on, man, he wanted to do the high-risk stuff, the high-flying stuff. But it's not like the Sheik's teaching fucking 5-star frog splashes, right?
Yeah, I don't think that the Sheik ever got up and off the top rope too much in his career, and there's a reason for that. He didn't have to, and the Sheik was a major attraction. But the important thing that the Sheik taught Rob and Sabu was the fundamentals, and he taught him how to protect himself in the ring and made sure he knew what the hell he was doing in the ring so people couldn't see through what he was doing.
So eventually he gets booked in the USWA, and this happens because the Sheik has a relationship with Jerry Lawler, and this is when things start to happen for Rob. The Sheik had named him the Polish Prince, and he had also wrestled as Robbie Z, Rob Zat, a few other silly names. And then one day he meets a promoter from Florida, Mr. Ron Slinker, and Ron Slinker is there to watch his son-in-law, Tex Slazenger, who we know as Midian or Phineas. Do you have any good Ron Slinker stories you can share with us? It's almost like a forgotten name from wrestling.
As a matter of fact, I do, because Ron Slinker came through the Houston territory way back when in the 70s. And Tom and I both being in karate, that was Ron's gimmick. He was a karate guy. So we would go back and talk to Ron about karate and about wrestling. And he would always be nice to us and talk to us. But many years later, when we got into the business and we were actually working, would kind of meet up with Ron from time to time, and he would always laugh about those two kids from Houston, Texas, the karate kids that ended up, making it in the wrestling business. Ron was always, really nice to us, and he was a nice guy. And like I said, he was the stepfather of one and only Midian. That would be Phineas Godwin.
So Ron actually gives him the name Rob Van Dam because he looks a lot like Jean-Claude Van Damme. And I feel like a lot of our younger listeners may not know how big of a fucking deal was Jean-Claude Van Damme in the early 90s.
Jean-Claude Van Damme was Chuck Norris probably before Chuck Norris. And I think that if you were to ask people back in the day who was going to be the star and who would be the one with the longevity in Hollywood, people would have chosen Jean-Claude Van Damme over even Chuck Norris. So he was a megastar. He was on the same level as Sylvester Stallone, when people looked at action heroes, and he was the shiznit.
At this point, and I think a lot of our listeners have probably seen this, Rob gets an opportunity to wrestle a little bit for WCW as Robbie V. And this happens because Ron is friends with Bill Watts, who's running WCW at the time. And so Rob actually gets an opportunity here to do some enhancement matches against Pat Rose, friend of the show from Chattanooga. I think he has a fishing show named Set the Hook or On the Hook. It's one of those, or Off the Hook. It's a hook fucking fishing show. With Pitt
Pitt likes to fash. Pat likes to fish.
Pitt likes to fash?
Yeah, that's close enough.
Is that like fresh paint a coat?
Exactly.
What's going on with you? Are you all right? You taking your meds?
I did. I took them early today. Maybe that's what's going on.